Good morning. Welcome to Bay Area UU Church. I am Reverend Katie McQuage-Loukas, and my pronouns are she and hers. Whoever you are, however you arrived with us today in body or mind or spirit, whether you've joined us in person or online, whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you are on your life's journey, you are welcome here with us this morning. If this is your first time, if this is your 500th time, you are welcome here, and we are glad that you are here. We enter a sacred hour together, one where we set aside the demands of the weekday world so that we might open ourselves to other longings, to our longing for connection, for meaning and for purpose, and for courage, hope, and joy. So bring your courage this morning. Bring your hope and bring your joy so that we might deepen our connections together and deepen our purpose. Come and let us worship together.
Mark Sheehan will light our chalice this morning. Symbol of light and knowledge, symbol of warmth and freedom, we light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love. Our opening song this morning is number 40, The Morning Hangs a Signal, verse 1 through 3. Please stand as you're willing and able. We gather here to seek the unity of spirit in the midst of diversity, to heal the wounded and confront the oppressor, to instill joy and confidence in our children, to grow in mind, body, and spirit ourselves, and to bear witness to the transforming power of love beyond which not a single atom nor soul is lost forever. Please join me in saying our covenant. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, thus to
Our unison reading this morning is number 600 in the gray hymnal. Number 600. The space within. 30 spokes share the wheel's hub. It is the center whole that makes it useful. Shape clay into a vessel. It is the space within that makes it useful. Cut doors and windows for a room. It is the holes that make it useful. Therefore, profit comes from what is there, usefulness from what is not there.
Is the Book of Mistakes. Exactly. I'm welcoming the young and the young at heart to come and view the pictures and read the story with me. The Book of Mistakes by Karina Loiken. You go ahead and have a seat because you'll be able to see the pictures. Okay. It started, let me see a face, with one mistake. What's the mistake? Yeah, the eyeball's too big. Making the other eye even bigger was another mistake. But the glasses, they were a good idea. Kind of covered up the mistake. The elbow and the extra long neck, mistakes. But the collar, ruffled with patterns of lace and stripes, that was a good idea because it covered up the mistake. And the elbow patches, they were a good idea too. Oh, that bush was another good idea. Dark and leafy so that you couldn't see through it. To the frog, cat, cow thing, another mistake. The big space between the ground and the bottom of the girl's shoe was a little bit of a mistake too. See all that doesn't touch the ground? But the roller skates, those were definitely not a mistake. The second frog, cat, cow thing made a very nice rock. And the girl with the very long leg, do you see it right here? It's kind of out of proportion. Looks like she always meant to be climbing that tree. Even the ink smudges scattered across the sky look as if they could be leaves, like they'd always wanted to be lifted up and carried. And what about the girl? Oh no, what happened? Can you tell us?
It looked like her paint.
Like the ink dripped onto her head, the back of her head.
Now she can make it look like hair.
Ooh, let's find out. Up. A helmet. Stringing balloons. And climbing the tree to find her friend with a really long leg. Perfect. So there really are never mistakes, are there? No. They can always be revised. Do you see how with each mistake, she is becoming? Do you see? Now? Who she can be. The end. Thank you, guys. It's great.
I'm sure it does not come as a surprise to many of you that many of us who are ministers and religious leaders were up very late last night talking to each other, saying, "What are you doing tomorrow? I don't know. What are you doing tomorrow?" Because it feels too simple to simply go forward with the service quite as originally planned. And so this morning, I've added an element to our candles of community. There is a bowl of water and a small bowl of salt. And I think this morning, many of us may be bringing more grief and more pain, more fear than we might normally bring on a Sunday morning. And so I hope that you will come up when it's time to light your candle and also take a pinch of salt and add it to the bowl, where it will become essentially our tears of lament and grief. And so this is the time in our service when we do share our hopes and our fears silently through the lighting of a candle. But this morning, please share your grief and your fears and your concerns through the salt water of tears, and then light a candle for hope, the hope of a different future, one with more justice and more peace. We light one additional candle this morning for all who are not with us, for those who are traveling, for those who are watching online, and also for those who live in our memory. You too are held in our hearts and in our prayers. We gather this morning, as we gather every Sunday morning, as a people of memory and of hope. We celebrate that we are together. We celebrate another morning of cool breezes, and we celebrate that we can be together and join our tender hearts in prayer. Once again, the world is too much with us, and we may not yet know how to carry it. Source of life and love, continuously unfolding, help us to join you in your becoming. Help us to find some grace in our own unfolding. May we learn to open our senses to bear witness to the world in all its beauty and all its terror, neither retreating nor growing numb nor overwhelmed. Help us to open our senses to the world's need, but also to where we might meet it, to find the places where we might mend what is frayed, heal what is wounded, renew what is weary, and when it is time, help us to know how to rest when it is we who are weary. Help us learn how to set down the burdens we carry for a time so that we might pick them up again, renewed in strength and courage. Amen. And now, before we move on to our song, the meditation I had originally planned for today is a meditation on interdependence and interbeing from Thich Nhat Hanh. And he writes a meditation about a piece of paper. And he says that if you are a poet, you will see clearly that there is a cloud floating in the sheet of paper. Without a cloud, there would be no rain. Without rain, the trees cannot grow. And without trees, we cannot make paper. The cloud is essential for the paper to exist. If the cloud is not here, the sheet of paper cannot be here either. So we can say that the cloud and the paper inter-are, interbeing, a word that is not in the dictionary yet, but if you combine enter with the verb to be, we have this new verb, interbe. The cloud and the sheet of paper inter-are. And if we look into the sheet of paper more deeply, we see the sunshine in it. If the sunshine is not there, the forest cannot grow. In fact, nothing can grow. Even we cannot grow without sunshine. And so we know that the sunshine is also in the sheet of paper. The sunshine and the paper inter-are. And we can see the logger who cut the tree, who brought it to the mill to be transformed into paper. And we see wheat. The logger cannot exist without his daily bread, and therefore the wheat that became his bread is also in this sheet of paper. And the logger's mother and father are in it too, and when we look in this way, we see that without all of these things, this sheet of paper cannot exist. And looking even more deeply, we see that we are in it too. And this is not difficult to see because when we look at a sheet of paper, this sheet of paper is part of our perception. Your mind is in here and mine is also. So we can say that everything is here with this sheet of paper. You cannot point out one thing that is not here. Time, space, the earth, the rain, the minerals in the soil, the sunshine, the cloud, the river, the heat, everything coexists with this sheet of paper. And that is why I, Thich Nhat Hanh, think the word interbe should be in the dictionary. You cannot just be by yourself alone. You have to interbe with every other thing. This sheet of paper is because everything else is. Suppose we try to turn one of the elements to its source. Suppose we return the sunshine to the sun. Will this sheet of paper be possible? No. Without sunshine, nothing can be. If we return the logger to his mother, then we have no sheet of paper either. The fact is that this sheet of paper is made up only of non-paper elements. And if we return these non-paper elements to their sources, there can be no paper at all. As thin as this sheet of paper is, it contains everything in the universe in it. And now please remain seated for our meditation hymn, Mother Spirit, Father Spirit.
When the Unitarians and the Universalists merged in 1961, they struggled to draft a single set of principles that met the needs of all. The struggle was intense enough that it strained the new merger, particularly around reference to heritage and to God. These are the statements that arose out of those sessions and were held by the newly formed Unitarian Universalist Association until the 1980s. In accordance with these corporate purposes, the members of the Unitarian Universalist Association, dedicated to the principles of a free faith, unite in seeking to strengthen one another in a free and disciplined search for truth as the foundation of our religious fellowship, to cherish and spread the universal truths taught by the great prophets and teachers of humanity in every age and tradition, immemorially summarized in the Judeo-Christian heritage as love to God and love to man. To affirm, defend, and promote the supreme worth of every human personality, the dignity of man, and the use of the democratic method in human relationships. To implement our vision of one world by striving for a world community founded on ideals of brotherhood, justice, and peace. To serve the needs of member churches and fellowships, to organize new churches and fellowships, and to extend and strengthen liberal religion. And finally, to encourage cooperation with men of goodwill in every land.
I'm not sure how many of you have lately or ever read the original principles from the time of the merger. There are elements that are familiar, but I think we can all agree that what we just heard is not actually who we are today, right now, in this moment. or where we are as an association. And my favorite piece of trivia, because this feels like such a UU committee thing that we would do, is no one could agree on our Judeo-Christian heritage, and so the compromise was the Judeo-Christian heritage. You can take it or leave it, you know. And so this version, this set of principles, isn't quite sure what it is, and it isn't quite sure what it might become, not yet. And those principles Jerry read held until the 1980s. And during that intervening period, yes, a lot happened to challenge the way the term Judeo-Christian heritage is used. We wouldn't even use the term at all today, and would, I think, properly separate our Jewish and our Christian heritage. But just as importantly, you heard a lot of language of men and brotherhood. And the 1977 Women and Religion Resolution called our association and our congregations to change our ways when it comes to that kind of language. Various women's movements within Unitarian Universalism were making inroads into the language in our hymnals and our readings. They were producing new readings and new hymnals, adding new music as well. The women's spirituality movement, again within Unitarian Universalism, not just outside of it, was developing new rituals and new educational materials. Most notably, the water communion that we celebrated a few weeks ago comes out of this time period, as well as Shirley Ann Rank. I think many of you might remember her. She drafted Cakes for the Queen of Heaven, a curriculum on goddesses and other forms of the divine that did not previously appear in much of our materials. And so at this point, a version of the principles from 1961 with some tweaks to gendered language is already circulating. But what actually wound up on the table at the General Assembly was dry and clunky. It had removed any mention of Judaism or Christianity, which was ruffling the feathers, I think, quite seriously, of people who felt they were being erased from our movement. And some folks who were not Jewish or Christian joined with them in protest because they felt that the new principles ought to say something about the sources of faith rather than nothing. And we can credit and thank Reverend Harry Holler with the brilliant idea of saying, what if we had a separate list of sources and we could talk about all of the things from which we draw wisdom? And so he helped create a separate statement about the 5, not 6, but 5 living traditions we share. The 6th source wouldn't be added until the 1990s. And then the 7th principle is an interesting moment, and we can credit Reverend Paul Leheroux, which I sincerely hope I pronounced correctly. The story is that at General Assembly, they're discussing the new 6 principles, and he stands up and delivers the suggestion of adding respect for the interdependent web. And it was adopted pretty closely to his precise phrasing. And I think that in later writings, he described it as a moment where he felt like a spirit was moving him, that he stood up not entirely of his own accord to offer this. And this is a much bigger change than we might realize because we've been swimming in it comfortably for some time. The gendered language changes were not cosmetic, but they didn't go as deep as this, as the 7th principle, to really challenge how we think about ourselves and what we collectively as a faith movement do. The 1961 principles are, I think, very intellectual. They lean into our heritage of individualism, and they lean a little bit into our institutions, but they don't say much about spirit or community. There are references to human worth and dignity, but the phrasing doesn't quite sing, although I'm sure it spoke to the spirits of someone. The 7th principle, though, makes a statement about how the world is, not how we want it to be, or our ideals or our dreams, but an actual theological claim that we are interdependent. And this claim is grounded in science and ecology, but it's also inspired by the earth-centered traditions and mysticism that's beginning to move through Unitarian Universalism at this time. We have a history of swinging back and forth that way. We institutionalize, we get a little stiff, we get a little starchy, and the transcendentalists come along and put everyone on the edge of their seats and get pushed out, but then reincorporated when we think about it a little bit more. This is a thing that we do. In 1979, Reverend Eugene Pickett had become the new UUA president, and he said that the old watchwords of liberalism, freedom, reason, tolerance, are simply not catching the imagination of the contemporary world. They describe a process for approaching the depths, but they testify to no intimate acquaintance with the depths themselves. And I think the seventh principle testifies. It makes a claim about the depths, and in doing that, it reaches back to the first principle to bracket the whole. And by doing this with both faith and reason, from a place of spirit and a place of science, I feel that this bridges some of the gaps that strain our movement from time to time. And at the same time all of this is happening, the sources are speaking of mystery and wonder, which are also entry points into something religious that can come from a place of reason or a place of intuition. And of course, I think the real miracle about the adoption of our 7 principles in the 80s is that there was only one dissenting vote. The earliest versions of the principles from before the merger are probably unrecognizable to many of us. And they may not hold a lot of personal meaning to many of you now, but I do want to highlight some phrases and concepts that came up over and over again in our history. The Philadelphia Convention in 1790 is when the Universalists got together to codify their articles of faith. And those are mostly straightforward expressions of Orthodox Christianity. But they include a statement that the nature of God is infinite and unchangeable love, and that it is necessary for human beings to live a holy, active, and useful life. The 1803 Winchester Profession, which is the one still used today by contemporary Christian Universalists, says there is one God whose nature is love. And believers practice good works, for these things are good and profitable to men. And this doesn't sound that revolutionary in 2023, but I assure you that in 1803, it was kind of a big deal to say that God is love. In that bastion of Calvinism that was convinced of an angry God and sinful human beings, to say that God's nature is love and that we are capable of practicing good works is revolutionary. The Unitarians are already sounding much less religious when they come together to attempt to put together some kind of document. And the 1953 statement opens in a way I find amusing. We desire to declare our belief as a denomination, so far as it can be officially represented. And I'm a little bit less in love with the way it talks about the teachings of Christ separated from foreign accretions, because that sounds pretty anti-Catholic to me and political more than religious. But I think they are picking up a thread from Theodore Parker's sermon a decade prior on the transient and the permanent in Christianity. And in that sermon, Parker claims there is an essential universal core of truth, the revelation of God. And everything we do, all of our practices and all the bits and pieces around it, that's just culture. And it comes and it goes and it's transient. And it is right for religion to change over time. The task of true religion, which Parker would call permanent Christianity, is to strip all of that away so that we are continually returning to a core truth and then using that truth to live well. And so the funny thing about Unitarian Universalism, and a funny thing about trying to explain this to people in seminary who take Christianity very seriously, is that we are no longer a Christian denomination. We may have Christians in our movement, but we are not all Christian by any means. But I think we have to admit that we might be Protestant because we just keep protesting. We keep revising. we keep critiquing, we keep reimagining and attempting to return to some kind of core, never quite satisfied that what we have in our hands is complete or permanent. And it's admittedly a little unusual to think that we protested ourselves right out the door and into somewhere else, but that is a thing that happens in religious traditions. And so like Theodore Parker, we're always looking to toss the ephemeral and to hold on to what we know to be true. And we are less sure than Parker that there is a single universal truth, or at least we're less sure that we're capable of figuring out what that is. And so we're willing to seek it in more places than he was, but we are, I think, still engaging in that same task. And there is real concern right now as our institutions and associations are taking yet another look at our principles that we are abandoning our heritage or leaping wildly into the unknown. But I hope that in my extremely tiny, barely there, could not grasp the whole of it, history of our principles, a few ideas came up. They change all the time. They always have. And that change is in itself part of our Protestant heritage. The changes being suggested right now are not themselves permanent, any more than the 61 principles were permanent. And they don't need to be perfect. They just need to meet our present context. The changes suggested are a response to longings and needs articulated at a grassroots level. And I hope that talking about those prior versions made clear another thing, that some of the changes suggested right now are actually reaching back farther into our history to reincorporate things that had fallen away over time. Because nowhere in the principles as they stand right now do we see the word love. It's in our sources. It's tucked away into the section on Jewish and Christian teachings. And so I think for some people it feels like it was demoted a little bit. And I think we also lost some clarity around how we talk about building a better world. Our principles right now state that we value justice and the democratic process, but that isn't quite as earth-shattering as the old Universalists saying that they will overcome all evil to establish the kingdom of God. And making the world more just isn't specific enough to be an action item on an agenda. And as sweeping and grand as building the kingdom is, it is actually fairly actionable because there is a book that talks about what that's supposed to be like, even if people can't quite agree on all of the details. There is a manual. And so by 1961, our principles don't really quite have a specific vision anymore. And without being grounded in something specific, in an articulated shared vision of what a better world might be, our ideals and our values are just kind of floating there without direction. And this is actually extremely typical and exactly what happens to liberal religious movements time and again. Because to be a religious liberal is to be open and generous in interpretation. It's a method, it's a process. And the terminology is coming out of classic liberal philosophy. It's distinct from political and economic liberalism because it has a different trajectory and a different development, but it's grounded in the same principles of individual freedom from restraint and a commitment to rational inquiry. And what's interesting is that commitment to inquiry extends even to itself. And so liberalism as an orientation, as a method and a process, is by definition change. Liberal religions respond to critique, internal and external. And so liberal theologies become a reflection of the concerns of the context and the present moment. And while liberal religions offer a critique of culture, the fact is that the theologies absorb culture much faster than they change it. And so often our liberal movements become institutionalized. Liberalism's commitment with engaging contemporary culture also then blunts its calls to social witness and its prophetic voice. And we see this again and again in history when liberal churches become more like social clubs or political clubs or anything other than an actual religious movement. And when we hit these moments in our history, a living liberal faith challenges itself to change again, to find within it a new way to meet the moment, or else it stagnates and likely dies. And so in the 1980s, Unitarian Universalism is incorporating critiques of sexism, critiques of individualism, and beginning to fold in a more ecological mindset. Where it had been shallow, it found depth. Where it had been narrow, it attempted to broaden. Reverend Diane Miller was one of the original movers and shakers in revising the principles that time around. And in April, she was interviewed for a UU World article. And she says, "I was appointed as a young feminist minister, given that so much of the impetus for change had come from women seeking more inclusive language and perspectives." She goes on to say, "The principles were not given on tablets on a mountaintop. They emerged from a small group of dedicated UUs in living memory with input from UU church members, church leaders, congregational meetings, and clergy." And she says, "How glad I am to see these core statements and values being examined once again." And in reading the recent suggestions, she says, "Oh, love is at the center. Love is the word that captures so much of what is special, what is holy, and what is divine." In the language of the new proposed Article 2, it says, "The purpose of the UUA is to actively engage its members in the transformation of the world through liberating love. We draw from our heritage of freedom, reason, hope, and courage, building on the foundation of love." And so in this version, the L word is back, and it is right at the center. Surrounding the burning chalice and the images that they are beginning to start to put out are values of interdependence, pluralism, justice, transformation, generosity, and equity. And we will talk so much more about these things as the year continues. All of those segments incorporate commitments and values from prior versions of our statements of faith. Under the pluralism section, it says, "We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology." And it follows that with an actual, detailed, and actionable commitment. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. So not only is our new framework placing love at the center, each listed value includes a commitment to action to which we covenant, which means the tone is shifting from an individual we affirm and promote to a communal one. We covenant, you and I together. And we'll talk about each of those individual sections in more detail in the months ahead. Here in worship, we'll talk about generosity and interdependence because of course we do, we always do. And we'll talk about it in small groups and we'll talk about it in classes. But this is the key shift I want us to try to hold as we think about what we are becoming. What does it look like for our individual journeys of faith to be happening within community? And what does it look like for us to center those journeys and our communities overtly and prominently in love? Reverend Miller's era was a bubbling ferment of activism around ecology, around gendered language, and also around the shape of worship and the trajectory of Unitarian Universalism as a whole. This era, this moment right now feels similar to me. Once again, people are raising issues of outdated language that doesn't feel inclusive, as well as more substantive and practical issues around inclusivity, from the way we govern ourselves to our style of worship. Once again, our faith is asking what the future needs us to be and what the future needs us to do. We still claim reason and liberty, but we also hold those in tension with our commitment to love and community. To my mind, this tension was born when we added the seventh principle, acknowledging that yes, we are the individual beings of the first principle, and we are also part of something larger than ourselves. Our search for truth is embedded in this larger thing, in the communities to which we belong, the histories we bring with us, and the histories we encounter along the way. And so the question this bracket raises between the first and the seventh principle is, if I'm on my own journey of spiritual growth and discovery, how do I ensure that everyone else is supported in theirs? How can my liberal religious journey contribute to the liberation of others? In order to be a living tradition, we must respond to the demands of our time and our place. We know that we cannot insist the answers of the 1980s, the 1960s, or the 1860s are still adequate to our current needs. In a world that needs love and justice so very badly, I do truly believe our movement is responding to a call for transformation from within and without. And I believe that in reconfiguring our principles, our sources, and the way we think about ourselves, we are rediscovering the taproots that have and will nourish us, ground us, and give us what we need to grow into what the world needs us to be. Amen. And now I invite you into a moment of gratitude and generosity, to give from a place of abundance in our lives so that we might live out our mission here in this community and in the community outside our doors. Please give as generously as you are able, and if you're visiting us for the first time this morning, please know that your presence has been a gift.
Please join me in blessing our offering. This gift from the abundance of my life blesses me, our ministries, and the world. Announcements. After today's service, please join us in Cockrell Hall for coffee and fellowship. And a reminder that Vesper service every Wednesday starts at 6:30 in the sanctuary please take a few moments out of your busy week and join us for this uplifting service. The annual Community Garden Potluck is this coming Saturday, October 21st at 11:30 a.m. in Cockrell Hall. Everyone is invited, so you don't have to be a gardener to come. Bring your favorite dish to serve and join us for to share and join us for good food and an interesting speaker, door prizes, and camaraderie. You can find more information in the order of service insert. We hope to see you there. There's a lot going on in church next Sunday. The monthly meeting of PFLAG will be right here in the sanctuary at 2 p.m. PFLAG works to keep families together in loving relationships, helping them to understand and affirm their gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and questioning family members. Anyone who is interested is welcome. The annual BAUUC Fall Festival will also be here next Sunday immediately after service in Cockrell Hall. There will be entertainment with something for everyone. Take part in crafts, games, face painting, hay rides, a bouncy house, and more. We will also be having a chili cook-off and bake sale. Look for the sign-up sheets in Cockrell Hall. All proceeds from the Fall Festival will benefit UNICEF. The Blood Mobile will also be here next Sunday starting at 8 a.m. Help save lives. There are still some spots available, so sign up now for next week's blood drive. To sign up, you can use the QR code that's on one of these posters, or see Ruth Bastian or Ivar Larson after the service. There is also a sign-up sheet outside Cockrell Hall. And finally, if you are not on our email list, you can sign up on our website at bauuc.org. We send out an email of weekly briefs every Tuesday that contain all of these and many other activities that are happening in our church. And now, if you'll please stand as you're willing and able for our closing hymn, Light of Ages and of Nations.
That hymn from our heritage tells us that revelation is not sealed, that there is always more to learn, more to know, and more to become. And our present day tells us that there may be love there may be justice there, and that we will find joy in going there together. So go in peace, and may you find love and joy in the week ahead. Blessed be, and amen.